Hello everybody and welcome to this week's video. This week I wanted to do a review of the M.Graham Watercolors I recently got, and I wanted to start by swatching out some of these colors like I usually do, kind of talking through my thoughts on the set that I have. Starting with the Permanent Alizarin Crimson, I thought this color wasn't as pinky as you would find with some colors. I found it to be really kind of a dark color, ever so slightly leaning more cooler than the Pyrrol Red. Still a very beautiful color, but I just feel like it didn't have that same kind of color that I expect out of an alizarin crimson. The Maroon Perylene is a very warm, kind of like a brick red color. I wouldn't exactly say it's like an exact maroon, but it's a beautiful, like really stunning color, and it's a color that I've really enjoyed using in a lot of mixes, both in floral, in nature, and food paintings. Like, it's all around been a very versatile color in my collection. The Pyrrol Red is a very bright, warm red. I would very much kind of liken this to like a primary red in my opinion, and I will say that if you're going to add a red to your collection, it's never bad to start with one that's kind of middle of the road. The Azzam Orange I found to be kind of a little strange. It's definitely more of like a yellow orange, but it has a coolness to it that I really haven't been able to wrap my head around. I haven't seen anything like it before. If I were to kind of describe this color to someone, I would say it's kind of like a cantaloupe color, and depending on how strong you have it, it can kind of also be like that mac and cheese kind of crayon orange that you used to see. It's not a bad color, I just haven't really worked around how I'm going to use it, so it's gone kind of untouched in my collection. The Indian Yellow is definitely very warm. I would definitely say it's probably a bit more reminiscent of the New Gamboge from Daniel Smith, if you're more familiar with that brand. It's definitely very beautiful. In my opinion, it leads maybe a little bit more towards the orange side of things, but again, very beautiful color. Now, the yellows in my set, I found them to be incredibly similar, almost interchangeable. It can be hard to even tell them apart at all. I will say that the Hansa Yellow Deep is probably the warmest. It can have a slightly darker quality to it depending on how you lay it down on paper, at least the dilution of it. But again, if you have these fairly diluted or fairly strong, all three of them can actually look almost identical depending on the dilution rate. Based on these three colors, I would say if you were buying them, you probably only need one. I'll probably insert some sort of swatch comparison so you can see what I mean, because the swatches that I carry in my little travel palette kind of indicate like different characteristics than what I have in the swatches that I've done for this video. So again, the Hansa Yellow Deep is probably the warmest. In this example, the Hansa Yellow is the coolest of the three, but I wouldn't necessarily call it a cool yellow. At least not as cool as the Hansa Yellow that you would find in Daniel Smith or other PY3s that I have seen in my collection. And then finally, the Azzam Yellow is still warm. I would kind of consider that one to be maybe more like a primary yellow in this example. But again, I think they're also similar. You only need one, but that's my opinion. I would be curious to know what the rest of their yellow lineup looks like, and I would probably try to find other yellows that better fit into that split primary palette, because I don't see the need for all of these, to be quite honest. The Nickel Quinacridone Gold is by far one of the most stunning Quinacridone Golds I have ever seen. It is very warm, very golden in its mass tone to like a light warm yellow. And the range in hues, I mean, you can't beat it. It's definitely one of my favorites. The Yellow Ochre is pretty similar to other yellow ochres that I've seen. The ones in my collection are a PY42 and this one is a PY43. I don't really see any major differences between this one and other ones. It's still quite opaque. It has a very similar hue to the other ones. The Sap Green is a bit warmer. It's a bit more mossy than other sap greens that I've seen, like Daniel Smith or Mission Gold or even Holbein. If I were to compare this to other colors that I'm more familiar with, I would say that it kind of reminds me of the Terre Verte from Holbein in terms of its hue, but this color is much more transparent than that one is. This this permanent green. Light is a really nice kind of brighter green. Light is exactly what you'd expect. I really don't have many notes on it, to be honest. The phthalo green is pretty much what you would expect for the most part. I find that compared to some other phthalo greens that I have, this one lacks that slightly darker kind of jewel tone quality to it, but it is a really, really beautiful color, and I really like it in this set. The turquoise is beautiful. It is everything that I expect from a turquoise. If you are familiar with Mission Gold, it is, I mean, an exact dupe for their peacock blue. So if you already have that color from Mission Gold, then there's absolutely no need to buy this one because it is the exact same in both its color and its pigment makeup. The ultramarine blue is mostly a very flat laying color. I was kind of surprised based on how granular some of their other colors are, but I personally am not a huge fan of granulating colors, so I love how flat this color is. And I only mean flat in how it lays. I wouldn't consider it like a flat color, like a dull color. It's very beautiful. The Quinacridone Blue is a very pretty inky blue. It does have this slight kind of granulating pattern to it, but not in the same way that their violets are granulating. It's enough to add this really kind of beautiful watercolor-esque look without showing the white of the paper. It's a very fluid granulating pattern, and I really, really love it. The Quinacridone Rust is a nice color, but it's probably my least favorite in how it lays down on the paper. It has this very streaky quality to it. You can definitely see the brush strokes in it when you're done, and then on top of that, it's quite a granulating color. So it's definitely not my favorite in how it lays down on the paper, but if you're just going by the actual color itself, it's a very beautiful color. I just don't like how it acts in use. The Burnt Sienna is a very pretty color. I would say when you're comparing it to the Quinacridone Rust, it does look a little bit dull, but I feel like if you added a little bit of red to it, you could get to a similar color as the Quinacridone Rust, and it would lay much flatter. The sepia is really quite nice. It lays pretty flat compared to some of their other colors, and up close it can be ever so slightly granulating, but it's actually really hard to see in most applications that I have used it in. The Payne's Gray is exactly what you would expect from a Payne's Gray, and just like other Payne's Grays that I have used, it does have a tendency to kind of bloom on the page a little bit. The Dioxazine Violet is very pretty, but it's lacking the depth and the vibrancy of some of the other Dioxazine Violets that I've seen. However, if you want a non-granulating purple from this brand, this is definitely the one. I would say that just like all of the other colors from this brand, that it does carry a very slight amount of granulation, but for the most part, it's up close. Now we get into the most granulating colors that I have seen, not only from this brand, but from watercolors in general. The Mineral Violet is very warm, very granulating, and very opaque. It can sometimes be weird when you re-wet it from a mixture that is on your palette. Occasionally it doesn't re-wet as planned, and you have to actually wipe up your pool of color and just mix a new one. And then the Cobalt Violet, it's still a granulating violet, but it's definitely cooler than the Mineral Violet. It's not demonstrated incredibly well in the swatch shown in this sheet, but overall it is a bit more granulating than the Mineral Violet. I ended up going to the store over the weekend, and I picked up a couple more shades of the M.Graham Watercolors that I thought I wanted to add to my collection, and I thought I would just do like a really quick add-on to this video. So the first color that I picked was Quinacridone Rose, and it was that much more kind of pinky color that I was looking for to add to my collection. I really appreciate this color, and since it's more vibrant color, it's harder to just kind of get this on your own. You can't really get it with the colors that I already had in my collection. The Cadmium Orange is such a bright, vibrant, more of like a true orange, and I knew I wanted to add that. I know a lot of people stay away from cadmiums in their collection, but the other one that was closest to this, they were currently sold out of, so I couldn't grab it. Hopefully in the future I can kind of swap that out for something else. And then I wanted to get another yellow. I knew Gamboge usually is more of a warmer yellow, so I thought I would grab that, and I really wasn't disappointed with it. I am pretty pleased. It lays somewhere between the Indian Yellow and the Hansa Yellow Deep. I think going forward, I will probably end up keeping the Gamboge and the Hansa Yellow in my palette. I may end up changing that in the future, but I feel like with a limited palette, those are the two colors that I would keep. And then Prussian Blue, I really like this color for mixing. I think it lends to a lot of really nice neutral colors. It's not a color that I tend to use very often on its own, but like I said, I do appreciate it for those neutral tones, so it was something that I wanted to pick up. And then finally, I got the Phthalo Blue Red shade, and I do think it's a little bit too similar. I think I could have left it out, but it is a very pretty blue regardless. I'm really happy that I got it. Now, moving on to some other pros and cons of these, I wanted to say, in terms of pros, at least for me, this is a honey-based paint, which I really love. I'm a huge fan of the Mission Gold, and I have to say, after using these, I am just as enamored with these paints as I am those. They are very easy to re-wet. I will say that at least in my experience and in the environment that I am in, I found them to not be as easy to re-wet as the Mission Gold, but I will discuss that a little bit more in a future video because I would like to have a full comparison of both brands. The colors are, for the most part, very vibrant and they are very highly pigmented. Like, these are definitely high quality watercolors. For me, they dried incredibly well in a palette, so much so that they are able to be carried in a split plastic palette, and by split, I mean that you have watercolors on both sides and it just closes up into one. So even when I have that palette folded over and gravity working against them for days or weeks at a time, they still stay right in place. They harden incredibly well for me, but keep in mind, I am in northern Vermont. I have a cooler, drier climate, and we do have a bit of a higher elevation here. So just keep in mind that depending on your area, you will most likely not have the same results as me. These watercolors can be purchased in sets and collections. I will say be careful about the ones that you purchase. I will talk about this a little bit more at the end of the video, but you're very likely to have duplicates when purchasing the sets. However, they can be extremely economical to purchase compared to buying the tubes individually. But if you are careful and you track the colors that you are getting in those sets, you can have very minimal overlap. The sets that they have put together are really quite interesting because they are based on subjects or areas that you might be painting. And for those who like to work maybe in plein air and have very limited palettes based on what you're going to be painting, these are definitely really intriguing sets to look at. Finally, I will say that many of these paints, despite their slightly slightly granular nature up close, they do dry pretty flat, and that I love. You would definitely have to see this brand up close in their swatches to know what I'm talking about when I'm referring to the granulation of it, but it's a very subtly granulating brand. So definitely from a distance you can't really see it. You don't really see a lot of granulating separation in their mixes. Now for some cons. This first one is just for me. Some of the colors are very heavily granulating. Some people may absolutely love that, and I acknowledge that. For me, I don't like it, but it just means that those couple colors I'll stay away from when I repurchase. You may absolutely love them, and that's great. Those are some colors that you can definitely get in your collection and get some really, really nice effects out of. And they do have a range of granulation within their line. Now, even though this is a US brand, I found that they can be very, very hard to find in stores. Especially in like specialized art stores, not necessarily like arts and crafts. I have been to a few art stores and they've actually been really difficult to find, but you can find them pretty easily online. You can get them on Amazon, you can get them on Blix and stuff like that. So that's really not a big deal if you're not opposed to buying online. Now, the biggest topic that I have seen about these paints is that they are very, very messy. They don't dry very well. They can remain very runny in their pans for most people. I haven't found that to be true for me, but I know that most people do have that issue, and that for the most part, these are a studio paint. That also means that they are very messy to pan. The colors very easily spill and ooze out when you're trying to fill them, and it just creates a very, very messy work environment that you have to try to either clean up or protect against prior to, and it can lead to the tubes getting very messy and paint getting stuck in the threads very quickly. So down the line, it'll be really hard to open up those tubes of paint that you have. It also means that you have to be careful about how you store these. I wouldn't recommend doing it vertically with the nozzle pointed down. Again, they get into the threads very easily, and I'm not sure because I haven't tried it, but you could very well have an issue where you might have like oozing out of the tube when pointed downward. That's never a problem that I've had with my paints, but I have heard of other people having that issue where they store paints in that manner and they leak over time. So that is something that I would kind of keep in mind. And I would also say that if you're someone who likes to keep them in like a drawer or some sort of little tin, just make sure it's one that can be cleaned easily and that you're not so precious with it you wouldn't want it to get dirty, because this can definitely be kind of a messy brand. Again, like I mentioned earlier, I was a little disappointed in the range of the yellows being so similar. That was something that I wasn't expecting. It's not something that I have experienced in the other brands that I have seen. All of them have very kind of distinct characteristics. The three of them are basically interchangeable. Like sometimes you could lay all three of them down and all three of them will look exactly the same. And I guess I don't understand it. Again, I want to look at their range and see if they have maybe something a little bit cooler that I could work into this palette, because for the most part I find that all of these are warmer yellows leaning towards kind of like that middle primary yellow. So you don't need all three of them. And then biggest kind of talking point that I have about these, the biggest drawback, is that these have a very distinct smell to them. It was something where I couldn't quite pinpoint it, and I had my husband smell them and he immediately picked it up. It smells like low tide. And that is very true. I wholeheartedly agree. As soon as you said it, I knew it. It is very smelly. If you like that smell, cool. If smells don't bother you, great. It's not like a toxic chemical smell, so maybe that won't bother you. But for me, I found it just kind of a little off-putting. Not so much so that I wouldn't purchase these paints in the future, because I can guarantee you they are on my repurchase list. But if you're sensitive to smells, or if you're sensitive to that smell, just keep that in mind and maybe work in a ventilated space. Now, my final thoughts on these paints is that they are definitely a repurchase for me. I absolutely love them. They are just a joy to work with. I've loved these colors. I will be using these in a lot of paintings going forward, and they've definitely rocketed towards the top of my list in terms of watercolors that I like. Many of you know that I love my Mission Gold, and I look forward to doing a full review of those and also a comparison video, 2 separate videos on those in the future. And I didn't think I would find a brand that would touch those in terms of how much I like them, but I have to say that some of these colors meet or surpass what I've thought of those. They kind of bounce in that range. So I'm very pleased with these. And finally, I just kind of wanted to talk about the sets that this collection of paints are from. This is from the 10 color deluxe set, the Desert Southwest set, the Jewel Tone set, and the Cityscape set. Altogether, that is 25 colors, but it led to 23 unique colors, the only duplicates being Burnt Sienna and Pyrrol Red. So if you are looking at getting a very similar collection to what I have, those are the sets that I have here, and very minimal overlap. If you are looking into buying other sets, what I would recommend is just going through the listings, writing down the colors that they have, and then kind of narrowing it down from there. And that'll be the best way that you can kind of make an informed decision about not wasting as much money, because they are significantly cheaper in these sets from what I've seen. And I know that for me, whenever I can save some money on art supplies or on anything, I definitely jump on it. But I would say buy the sets that you need and that make sense, and then supplement it with a few tubes that you buy individually going forward to kind of fill out your set, which is most likely what I'm going to do with a couple of primaries. So I think that is all for this video. I hope that you really enjoyed it. I hope that you found it helpful, and like always, feel free to leave your thoughts about these paints down below. If you've tried them, if you've liked them, maybe some other paint brands that you really love or you'd like for me to check out, and let me know what you think of this video. So that's for today. Thank you so much for watching and for being here, and I will talk to you all next time. Bye!